Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a continuation of this new series on the divine person called the Son of Man in the book of Daniel. Of course, we laid out foundational sources and teachings right now in the last two episodes, at least concerning that the nature or the divine nature of this person known as the Son of Man in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, verses 13 to 14. Last time we talked about some of the teachings that are found in the Jewish thoughts before the New Testament. And we closed last time with asking these fundamental questions. One of them was, what would have caused the Jews, for instance, to interpret that this figure, the Son of Man of Daniel, was no other than the Messiah, and were they correct in their assessment? And also, what would they think, basically, or why would they think this heavenly figure was considered to be the particular anointed one, the Messiah, that will come through the promises of God to the King David, technically speaking. So let's go ahead and explore these questions right now. When we do a careful analysis, basically, of the Hebrew Bible, we will find answers to these questions. For instance, the Old Testament evidence for the Messianic interpretation of Daniel in chapter 7, verse 13 to 14, the Jews knew from the Holy Scripture and the inspired writings, basically, of the Word of God, that dominion in general was given to mankind. In other words, we're not talking just about one individual. Dominion was given to mankind since creation. How do we know this? Because the Old Testament teaches this. For instance, the Psalms. Psalms 8 teaches something like this. Let's take a look. For instance, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man? That you take thought of him, and the Son of Man, that you care for him. Notice here is man and the Son of Man used interchangeably. This is parallelism. So one can argue that the Son of Man here is not just one individual. It's talking about all of humanity. Okay? Yet you have made him a little lower than God, and you crowned him with glory and majesty. You make him to rule over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes through the paths of the seas. This is passage from Psalms 8, verses 3 to 8. What is so incredible about this psalm, it's like it mimics the creation account that we find in Genesis 1 and part of Genesis 2, when God made Adam and Eve and gave them this creation mandate to have dominion over all things and to be fruitful and multiply. For instance, we can read about this basically in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 to 28. As you can see, then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. He created them. God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Genesis 1, verses 26 to 28. Obviously, these passages basically show that God has appointed humanity, mankind, the Son of Man in this case, called to reign over his creation. That doesn't make humanity, by the way, in general, or any person of the human race to be divine. So one still asks, how did the Jew then distinguish between humanity in general and this particular character of Daniel's chapter 7, verses 13 to 14? That's the fundamental question we're asking. This promise also of having ruleship and having dominion over God's creation was transferred now from all of humanity to a particular person, in this case, King David himself. So this promise was transferred over to the kings of Israel, but in particular, King David. And out of King David and his descendants will come this figure, the Messiah, that we will be talking about. If you go to Psalm chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, a big section, let's read and see what's going on. Why are the nations so angry? Why do they waste their time with futile plans? The kings of the earth prepare for battle. The rulers plot together against Yahweh, and notice, and his anointed one, meaning that his Messiah, meaning his Christ. But so far, this is talking about King David actually, but it's considered to be a Messianic psalm because also it's fulfilled in the person of Christ himself. Let us break their chains. They cry, and free ourselves from slavery to God. But the one who rules in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. Then in anger he rebukes them, terrifying them in his fierce fury. For the Lord declares, I have placed my chosen king on the throne in Jerusalem, on my holy mountain. I will proclaim Yahweh's decree. He said to me, speaking to David, but it is truly fulfilled in the person of Christ. He said to me, you are my son. Today I became your father. I have begotten you. Only ask, and I will give you the nations as your inheritance, the whole earth as your possession. You will break them with an iron rod and smash them like clay pots. Now then, you kings, act wisely. Let me ask a question. When exactly did David receive such an inheritance to have possessions of the whole earth? Obviously, you can begin to see now that while it's still speaking to David, it's really not David the intended person here. It's more than just David himself that is the subject of this particular teaching. Continuing on with Psalm 2, be warned, you rulers of the earth, serve Yahweh with reverent fear, and rejoice with resembling. Kiss the Son. Notice? Kiss the Son, or submit to him basically, lest he will become angry and you will be destroyed in the midst of all your activities. For his anger flares up in an instant, but what joy for all who take refuge in him. Once again, David has enemies, by the way. You read the Psalms and you see how many times he lamented those enemies, but he never destroyed all of them. He couldn't really have dominion over all the earth. He could not fight all of his enemies that existed on the face of the earth. So obviously, we are talking about more than just David, literally, but rather a descendant here that will fulfill all of this literally. You find the same teachings, by the way, in other Psalms like Psalm 72, verse 1, Psalm 72, verse 5, Psalm 72, verses 8 to 11, Psalm 72, verse 17. All of this is spoken of there. Psalm 89, verses 19 to 37, we'll take another look at this. Long ago, you spoke in a vision to your faithful people. Speaking of God, Yahweh. You said, I have raised up a warrior. I have selected him from the common people to be king. I have found my servant David. I have anointed him with my holy oil. This is the story when the prophet Samuel went looking for David, and he was pointed to him by God, and he anointed him to be the next king after Saul. With whom my hand will be established. My arm also will strengthen him. His enemies will not defeat him, nor will the wicked overpower him. I will beat down his adversaries before him and destroy those who hate him. By the way, if you look at the history of David, you begin to see that really not all of this was fulfilled in his own person. Obviously, there is more to the story than just meets the eye. Continuing on. My faithfulness and unfailing love will be with him, and by my authority he will grow in power. I will extend his rule over the sea, his dominion over the rivers, and he will call out to me, you are my Father, my God, and the rock of my salvation. I will make him my firstborn son, the mightiest king on earth. I will love him and be king to him forever. My covenant with him will never end. So now we're talking about David, but obviously there is a Davidic covenant here, and someone gonna continue fulfilling these promises as the descendant of David. And also, a couple of more passages here from Psalm 89. I will preserve an heir for him. You see, now we're beginning to see the picture. His throne will be as endless as the days of heaven. So now the heir, the descendant of David, is the one now that's going to fulfill this everlasting kingdom, basically. But if his descendants, now speaking of David, forsake my instructions and fail to obey my regulations, if they do not obey my decrees and fail to keep my commands, then I will punish their sin with the rod and their disobedience with beating. And that's exactly what happened. Solomon began this, domino effect of disobedience to God, not obeying all of his commandments. After the death of Solomon, Israel was split into two kingdoms, northern kingdom and southern kingdom. This was fulfilled actually at that time as a result of their disobedience. But the kingdom that we're talking about here is an everlasting kingdom that unites all nations under the leadership of the coming Messiah, the descendant of David. Let's finish Psalm 89 here, and we read the following: but I will never stop loving him, nor fail to keep my promise to him. So even though David and his sons disobeyed, God says, my promise and my covenant will continue and will be fulfilled. No, I will not break my covenant. I will not take back a single word I said. I have sworn an oath to David, and in my holiness I cannot lie. His dynasty will go on forever. His kingdom will endure as the sun. It will be as eternal as the moon, my faithful witness in the sky. Now, one thing I want to point out to people here, because I know sometimes people ask me these questions, they will say, well, wait a minute. It says that, his dynasty, the dynasty of David, will go on forever. His kingdom will endure as the sun. The sun is there for a long time, since the days of David until now. How come then that there were interruptions in terms of the descendants of David, the kings that came from his lineage, have interruptions? There were exiles and other things until the Messiah came. Well, God's way of saying that the promise is going to continue forever. God is not going to break that promise. Interruptions will happen due to the unfaithfulness of the people, and you are going to see it like this throughout the history. But the promise, technically speaking, is forever. God never forgets his people, and there'll come a time when this kingdom will always exist and there'll be no stopping to it. So we need to focus on it this way, and we need to understand that this is how God does these things. Okay? So let's keep going now. Now we notice, of course, that much like the Son of Man in Daniel, the Davidic king, or the descendant of David, basically, not only rules all over all the nations forever, he also receives homage, worship, and obedience towards him. So now we're beginning to see how the Jewish people began to connect the dots together. Even though they understood that God promised humanity to have dominion over all things, later that was transferred to David and the kings of Israel. But then specifically, we know that the fulfillment of the promise of dominion, perfect dominion over all the earth and receiving worship from all nations and rule over them, is fulfilled in the person of one person, that is the Christ or the Messiah, to come from the line of David. Until we meet again, have a blessed day. Thank you for watching. Please like our video, and we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, CIRA International. And be sure also to click the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we upload new videos into the channel. And finally, I like to prayerfully encourage you to become a patron through Patreon. Your giving is much needed and will enable us to produce more and more of videos like this so that we can publish them on a weekly basis. So thank you in advance.